Freedom Wranglers. It has been a little bit of time since we've been together. I was off jetting around the world, but that is a whole other story for another time. I visited Japan and it's amazing. And I'm going to leave it there. But we have a super special guest, and I'm going to allow Jamie the opportunity here to go ahead and introduce our new friend.
Yes, I'm so excited. I'm so excited that you're on our show, Liz. So we know that you're the director of the New York City work of Jews for Jews for Jesus. And you work closely with students and creatives. You have a background with your parents. They were starters up in the 1970s, which I think is super cool for the Jews of Jesus. So you grew up in New York City and Toronto, and you came from a Messianic Jewish home, and your faith in Jesus is very strong, obviously, and you came to a place of wanting to participate in your faith and doing your own thing in high school. And as a part of faith in Jesus and as a Jewish person, you observed and participated and hosted Jewish traditions. So we can't wait to hear what your testimony is and how God is using you in a mighty way. And we couldn't be more thrilled that you're on our show. So Liz, I'm going to pass the mic to you. We can't wait to hear your story. Thank you for coming on.
Yeah, it's great to be on the podcast and to get to meet you guys as close to in person as we'll get for now. And I like sharing my story, even though I'm very familiar with it. You know, sometimes we forget our own stories aren't known to other people. And so I do like getting to share my story. I grew up in a Messianic Jewish home, as you said, meaning that my parents were already believers in Jesus before my sister and I were born. And so I grew up being taught about Jesus from a very young age, why it is that I should believe in him, how is it that I live for him. And then I was also raised with Jewish experiences, celebrating Jewish holidays, and other like cultural touch points that are common in the Jewish community. And so I really was raised with an understanding of both. Although when it comes to my testimony, I remember asking Jesus into my heart when I was 4 in a Sunday school classroom. And so I always like to give a shout out to Sunday school teachers that, ask kids if they want to ask Jesus into their hearts, because they will, and it makes a difference.
Yes.
And my parents divorced when I was 13, and that was a very difficult time at a very difficult time. There's no good time for parents to get divorced, but 13 is a tough spot for sure. And when that happened, I grew really angry with God. I didn't understand how he could allow this to happen to my family. As you mentioned in my bio, my parents were part of the founding group of Jews for Jesus. And so they had served as missionaries for my whole childhood, up until just before I was 13. And so I just didn't understand. I was really confused. I was really hurt. And I was at a conference. I was still a good kid, though. I was afraid of getting in trouble. And so I was at a Believing conference and was in all of the sessions, even though I wasn't listening to anything. I just didn't want to skip and get in trouble that way. And while I was there in one of those sessions, I heard God speaking to me. And it wasn't an audible voice. It was just sort of like a knowing and hearing, like inside my head, inside my body as well, where I heard God saying, "Would you give me another chance?" And I was 14 or almost 14 then. And I shrugged my shoulders and I said, "Fine." But that actually really was permission. I was a teenager. I wasn't going to emote too much, show too much enthusiasm. And so I said yes at that point, and that really made a difference. So just before I started high school, the summer between 8th grade and high school was when I really found that my faith started to become my own and not just what my parents raised me with. And then my discipleship and growth kind of really started from that point as right as I started high school, which was a great thing to have. So that's part of it. Yeah.
Yeah, you said something there that I just think is so key. That God asked you, will you give me another chance?
Yeah.
And how many times in our lives do we say, God, just give me another chance? We're constantly returning to him, but for him to beckon your heart that way is so powerful. It just shows how much he loves us and he wants our hearts.
Yeah, and as I've had other struggles with my faith and periods of doubt in my 20s and in my 30s, because I also think that's part of my testimony is asking the questions of like, why do I still believe?
Yeah.
Uh, the question of or that piece that I learned then of God's faithfulness to me is a story he keeps telling in my life. And so I had that question really clearly when I was 14, but I've had different versions of that same thing ever since. God's faithfulness.
It's like a Pilgrim's Progress. I don't know if you've ever read that book,
Yeah.
Pilgrim's Progress, but it's so
Yeah.
much like that, our journey in Christ and how we have those moments where we get all muddy but then it's like we know who we are in Christ and we're like, we don't deserve to be in this muddy area. Like God has so much more for me, and his grace is so good. Like it's so good to know that he cares for us. So that's what I was thinking about when you were talking about your journey was the Pilgrim's Progress.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
Wow. So, you said yes and you start following the Lord. And then, how does that transfer over into the position you're in now? Because it's like, it's awesome. I mean, you're correct me if I'm wrong. You're the director for the New York City branch. Is that right?
Yeah. Yeah. I've been in that role for it's coming close to 6 years. And so I feel at this point I've really grown into it. The first couple of years of it were challenging for sure. But so I'll go back to when I was in high school, the church that I was involved with, because I was going to a church at that time. They had a lot of like opportunities for young people to be serving in the church. And so I found different things within the church to be able to participate with. And that was really great. My faith was growing in that time. And then in the summer vacation, I had the opportunity to be part of things that Jews for Jesus had for young people. And so though my parents had served with Jews for Jesus through when I was 11, we weren't involved with them for a number of years. And so then I found my way back in through the programs that they have for young people. And so there's a summer camp called Camp Gilgal that I was asked to be an assistant counselor one year. The next year I came back as a counselor and then was part of a missions trip for teenagers that took place in New York. And I didn't mention, but I was born in New York and raised in Toronto, Canada. And so that's where I grew up from first grade through high school, or grade 1, as we would say there. Yeah. And so it was serving that really was a place where I saw my faith activated. I saw my faith growing. I could hear God speaking to me or through me more when I was in places of service. And as a 16, 17, 18-year-old, that was really exciting. And then when I was 19, I was at the summer camp again. And I had this awareness as a 19-year-old that God had gifted me and I was in a place where I was using my gifts. And it just made a huge difference. It kept me really excited and looking for more places to serve. And at that point, I think I felt something of a calling towards ministry, but I wasn't willing to really admit it. I wasn't ready to own it. And so as I went through college, that was something I was continuing to explore. And did an internship with Jews for Jesus. I went to Hunter College in New York City. And so I continued to be involved with Jews for Jesus, but it was, while I was here, it was like 1 foot in and 1 foot definitely out. I wasn't ready to like commit to ministry. I'd seen my parents be in ministry. I didn't really want that for myself. But yet God kept encouraging me towards it. And so after I finished university, I took a year off. I traveled, did my first 3-month backpacking trip in Europe. There were others, but that was my first one. And then I had been asked to direct the summer camp that year. as the director had been asked to do something else within Jews for Jesus for that particular summer. So I had said yes to direct the summer camp, and it was while I was in the preparation phase of putting that season's camp together that I filled out the missionary staff application and went through that process. And while I was trying to discern that, I also really felt that God was giving me the choice to say yes now or to say yes later. I had studied art history, and I knew somebody who was working at an art auction house. And so I felt there was like an opening potentially there. And I also felt that God was saying, you can do one now and you can do the other later.
Mm-hmm.
And it, at some point, it just kind of clicked. And I went, well, I want to do this now. I want to do ministry now while I have relationships already built and established. And so, yeah, so that was back in 2006, 6. And so then I've been serving with Jews for Jesus as a missionary and in a variety of different roles since then.
Wow.
So, yeah.
So when Jews for Jesus have missionaries, how does that look? Does that look the same as what we would look like in, a standard, Christian church? Or is this like, do you guys go out and say, hey, you're going to be on the mission field in, Pakistan, for talking sake, for the next 6 months? Does it look like that, or is it a little different?
It is a little bit different. So all of the missionaries with Jews for Jesus are either Jewish or married to someone Jewish. So that's something that is unique about Jews for Jesus as an organization. And it's not that non-Jewish people can't reach Jewish people with the gospel. Absolutely you can. And in fact, more Jewish people come to faith through the witness of Gentile, non-Jewish Christian friends. So keep sharing. It's effective. But that's just one of the criteria in our organization. And we are sent. So there is a sending that goes with it. But in a lot of ways, I'm an indigenous missionary. So I'm a Jewish New Yorker trying to reach Jewish New Yorkers with the gospel.
That's what yeah.
Yeah. So when I realized that, I was like, oh, whoa, I'm an indigenous missionary.
Yeah, you're kind of like a Paul the Apostle, you're like, you know Jewish history, about the Jewish culture, and you can reach them more. You would be able to reach the Jews better than I would, being a Gentile.
Yeah. And so we have missionary offices around the world, and there are staff from other countries or places that are serving in different parts of the world. But when and where we can have someone from that country serving in their own country, we try to do that, because culturally you understand more, language skills you already have, all of that sort of thing. And so there are advantages of having local people reaching local people.
Cool. I have a question. You just mentioned, do you read Hebrew and speak it?
No. So I read Hebrew. I started preparing for bat mitzvah when I was 12 years old. We didn't follow through with it. My parents got divorced that year. That was one piece of it. But I was learning Hebrew then. I already knew how to read and write, but I was learning some like modern vocabulary. I took a couple years of modern Hebrew in college. And I have done language classes in Israel, also here in New York. I have a Duolingo streak going right now. So I don't speak it. I think going from understanding parts of a language to actually being able to produce it is really, I find it really challenging. I don't have that gift of language that I know a few people who do, and I'm quite jealous, but that's okay.
Yeah, that's my husband. He set us up for great success when we went to Japan. So
that's great.
I think you got to be wired that way or something.
Yeah.
Very cool. Well, so, I know we kind of sent a few questions, to you, and there's a couple of different holidays, that I'm curious about. So when it comes to holidays, Easter and Passover tend to coincide. They tend to kind of collide and be at the same time.
Yep.
Well as like Hanukkah and Christmas. And then you have like Shabbat, which is, that Friday evening. So how do you practice the holidays? Because you're a believer in Jesus, but you're staying true to those Jewish roots.
Yeah. So the way I practice as a Jewish believer in Jesus is probably not the same as anybody else. And everybody else will like celebrate it differently. And even more so as believers is that, well, that's the same in the Jewish community. In the Jewish community, there's a really wide spectrum from very secular Jewish people to traditional, and then into various levels of religious. And so the Jewish community celebrates or commemorates the holidays differently from each other. And then Jewish followers of Jesus or Yeshua, that's his Hebrew name or his name in Hebrew, we celebrate differently from each other also. So I'll share from my experience because that's what you asked. So I grew up not observing Shabbat every week, but we would at least once a month. My parents were serving in ministry, so it was all often in that context, and it would be with a group of people, either at our home or at another location. And Shabbat usually it starts with a family meal on Friday night, lighting of candles, challah, which is a braided egg loaf of bread, and then wine to go with it. Some blessings, very short, that's not a long service. It's just a few short blessings to kind of usher in and to start the Sabbath, to start Shabbat. And then it's followed by a meal. And if you're religious, then there's a lot of rules about what you do or don't do as you enter into a day of rest. But for us, we wouldn't do more than the Shabbat dinner. The Shabbat dinner, if we did it, that was us doing Shabbat. And then there were no rules on Saturday except normal household rules. So that was as a kid. And then as an adult, it's been similar. There have been seasons where I've celebrated Shabbat every single week, but not year over year. It's always for like 8 or 10 weeks, I'll have celebrated Shabbat every week. And then something gets in the way and I kind of let it. With Jewish holidays, that's also changed from what my family did as when I was a kid. Through when I was in high school, I had a very low interest in Jewish holidays and things, which isn't surprising as teenagers don't like stuff.
Yeah.
And then I found my way back into celebrating and making my own customs and traditions with the rest of the Jewish holidays kind of moving through. Yom Kippur is an interesting one. It's the Day of Atonement.
Yeah.
And for religious Jewish people, and for traditional Jewish people, this is also the most holy day on the Jewish calendar. It's the Day of Atonement. And there isn't a temple anymore, so there's no high priest that's offering sacrifices. But in modern terms, it's a day where it's a reflective day. It's an introspective day. It is a day of taking account. I know some friends who take it very seriously as introspection and it's not New Year's Day where you're setting like goals and resolutions for yourself. It's not that. There's more meaning or weight to it.
Yeah.
But that might be the closest comparison of I really want to try to be a kinder person this year. So where are the areas where I tend to be unkind? This might be a traditional Jewish person or perspective. For me, I'm not looking for atonement or covering in the Day of Atonement. That really was done through the work of Jesus, his laying down of his life in my place, very much in lieu of the Day of Atonement.
Right.
And so some years I'll fast on Yom Kippur because that's traditionally what Jewish people do, but it's not fasting for the sake of earning something. Sometimes I do it to participate with the Jewish community and just be identifying with. And sometimes the fasting helps me spiritually, but I'm not great at fasting. I usually find it just way too distracting. but I don't have a practice for fasting, so that's probably why it's more distracting than spiritual. So I don't know if you guys have a fasting practice.
I'm going to be honest. I have fasted recently,
Yeah.
and let me tell you, 24 hours. I did a 24-hour fast.
Yeah.
And, I only fast like for, prayer, like when there's something
Yeah.
that's really, something that's really hurting me, or something that's not right, or I'm praying, maybe, I have adult children, I have adult sons, praying for them, or, and I'll normally just say, Lord, kind of like create in me a clean heart, Lord, search me, oh God, and I give this food to you. I give all this, and I want to focus on the word. I want to focus on God. And honestly, it's refreshing, because your faith gets stronger when you give something up. When you could depend upon him, even with food. And to me, food is the best way to fast. I know some people fast from a cell phone, some people fast from, but food, every time you eat something, it increases dopamine. So dopamine gets released after you eat. So it makes you feel super good, when you eat something. So I was totally clean from having that feeling of dopamine getting released, because no food for 24 hours. And honestly, it's amazing, because there was a lot of answered prayer that came through from that. And and I know that you don't have to fast, but for me, it was good for me for that, like you said, that introspective, to kind of look within and see, well, what is it in me that's not right? And normally that's what I find out. There's something wrong with me.
Yeah, it gives us that opportunity to really just focus on where our hearts are at and align it with the Lord, but it can be super distracting, especially if you're like, man, my tummy is rumbling, or am I doing it right? Am I doing all the things? And yeah, I can relate to the distracting. I've done both. I've done, 72-hour fasts. I've done Daniel fasts. That's a really big one that a lot of people like to do in the run up to Thanksgiving, but I think that if we're separating time for him in any given way, I think that the Lord's, no matter what, So you kind of intermingle things, and when you do that with the different holidays, like you said, you don't always practice Shabbat, but you're feeling like, hey, this is a season, we're going to do this, and you do that. So when you get into things like Easter, where does that fall? Because Easter is also very pagan in a lot of ways, and the roots of it, and the Roman calendar. We've got all these things we could go down the road of, those are just rabbit trails. But yeah, curiosity is how do you where do you see the importance? I know you see the importance in Jesus' death and resurrection, but the Passover really was also so much a part of that.
Yeah, Passover is my favorite Jewish holiday. It might be my favorite holiday, like full stop. Passover coincides with Easter 7 years out of 8. There's a leap month on the Jewish calendar every once in a while, so that's when Passover and Easter are about a month apart. The rest of the time they're lined up with each other. Easter is the commemoration of the resurrection. And so that's the most important day in our faith. The Christmas with the incarnation of Jesus, him entering into the world to redeem us himself. That's huge. But the resurrection is the culmination of what he then came to do, what Jesus came to do. And so that one is really important. But as a Jewish person, sometimes I've had a funny relationship with it, because I didn't grow up, in my family, we didn't grow up with the Easter customs. So Easter baskets, Easter eggs, which are great, and they're fun for kids and all of that, and family and tradition and that sort of thing. But I didn't grow up with that. So I still look at it as like, that's a little odd that we do that. It's a little odd that it's so pervasive, but that's family and that's custom. And I get that as well. Passover is the story of freedom. It's the story of physical freedom for the Jewish people from slavery to Pharaoh in Egypt, but it's also the story of spiritual redemption, because what Moses told Pharaoh is that he wanted to bring the people out so that they may worship the Lord in the wilderness. It was always about worship. It was always about the relationship with God as well. And so spiritual redemption, physical redemption, and freedom are tied so deeply into the holiday. And then when we do look at the life of Jesus, the Last Supper was a Passover Seder. Jesus was celebrating Passover with his disciples. The commemoration of the Passover lamb, the lamb was sacrificed for the 10th plague, so that the angel of death would pass over the homes of any who had put the blood on the doors. Not just the Jewish people in Egypt, but any person who did it. So when the Jewish people left Egypt, it was a mixed multitude. Many Egyptians went with them as well, and were able to experience the freedom and relationship with God even at that point.
That's so powerful, because I never thought about that piece. Anybody, which just like sets the precedence for what takes place in the freedom systems, every single one of us. Wow. Wow.
Right.
Like a type of Christ.
Yeah. God chose the Jewish people, and through them through the Jewish people, we received scriptures. We received the Messiah. We also receive relationship with God. And like this mixed multitude piece at Passover is one of those instances of God's salvation story being for all people and not just for one group of people. It's always been about the whole world.
That's so powerful. I have goosebumps from head to toe, because it is just get those revelations. But I think that's why Gentiles, Christian people like ourselves, have got to understand the Old Testament significance of it. We can't just be focused on the New Testament, and because it's one beautiful story that's completely interwoven.
And there's so much foreshadowing, and there's so many, like, God tells the redemption stories in different ways. Jesus is the culmination of that 100%, but you see that God's redeeming character is consistent throughout the thousands of years before Jesus's day. And then that speaks to us about God's faithfulness for the thousands of years since Jesus's day. It just, I think it's really important. For me, I've always found the Old Testament a very rich place to know who God is.
It's funny because one of our good friends, Carrie, she accepted Christ. Gosh, it's going to be coming up on to 3 years now, I think. And she said, "Where do I begin?" I said, "Well, let's get to know Jesus a little bit, but then I want to take you through." And so we started going through the Old Testament and things last year. And she was like, "I feel like I can see Jesus in these places. Am I crazy?" And I was like, "No, he's all over there." I said, "You just just keep reading." And it's, so if your eyes are open and you really dig in, you can, like you said, there's a richness there that will just open your eyes to so many things about Christ. And it doesn't matter how many times you read the word, you're always finding something new. Like I never read it and then thinking, I know this. No, it's like something else. Holy Spirit just prompts us and shows us those things. It's so awesome.
But I was talking about Passover, and I went somewhere else.
You got me excited.
And so like Jesus, so I was talking about the lamb, and then the spiritual redemption as well as the physical redemption. And throughout, you can see it in the Gospel of John. In John 1, John the baptizer, Jesus's cousin, says, "Behold the Lamb of God who takes away the sin of the world." And so lamb is associated with Jesus from before he did anything. And then at Passover, you're celebrating freedom in part because of the lambs that were sacrificed so that the Jewish people could go free. And it's in that context that Jesus then lays down his own life as well. And so I can see the connections between the Jewish holidays, the Jewish stories, and like how they point to Jesus or have found their fulfillment in Jesus. And this is part of what God was doing. And so as a Jewish follower of Jesus, I love getting to celebrate and experience these things in this light. And then when I'm celebrating Passover with Jewish people who don't believe in Jesus, I sit there and I kind of watch and I'm like, how do you not see this? And what's funny is sometimes I have Jewish friends who know, I mean, of course they know me, they know who I am as a Jewish believer in Jesus. And they'll make jokes, they'll make Christian jokes about some of the Passover elements and go, Liz, do you want to explain this like this instead? And I just think it's funny because even though it's a joke, there's something in there. And I think there's something that's happening that even if they might not think Jesus was the lamb, they're still making that association in their brain at some level. And so at some point it could make sense. And then when it makes sense, it's sort of like the flood opens and you're like, how did I not see this before? And I love those moments when a Jewish person has like become a believer in the last year and then they get to celebrate Passover. They sit there and they go, how did I not see this? And it's amazing. It's such a cool thing. It's such a cool God thing.
Oh, I've had one experience with one Jewish lady actually, and she worked at the gym. She was like, she did all the administrative stuff for the gym, but she wasn't a practicing Jew. And it was really interesting because I'm always talking about Jesus. I was always talking about the Lord and how good he is. And she goes, I'm an atheist. And I'm like, I thought you were Jewish. She goes, oh no, I'm Jewish, but I'm an atheist. And I'm like, well, which one is it? Which one, she goes, well, I'm, my tradition, I am Jewish, I'm a tradition. I'm there. And it just broke my heart because I just wanted to share the love of God with her. But if you're an atheist, you don't even understand anything. And like, you're just oblivious to everything, but yet she's practicing the holidays and I just remember just my heart breaking for her. And it's interesting because she was one of the many people that helped me get out of a very abusive relationship. She was just the most loving person. And she was one of the main people in my life that helped me get out of a really bad situation. Yeah. So I will always remember her. I won't say her name on here, but she knows who she is. But I'm still praying for her. And it's like, how do you talk to somebody that doesn't even want to receive, and then hearing you that you're this you're actually sitting here and you're Jewish and you're able to express and know all these traditions but also share Jesus. How would you approach somebody like that says they're Jewish but they're atheists? And I don't know if you've ever come in contact with anybody like that.
Oh, yeah. The majority of Jewish people in the world are secular.
Really?
And so if you're secular, you might be atheist, you might be agnostic, humanistic.
Wow.
Not really put yourself in any one particular box. But at this moment in history, the majority of Jewish people are secular. And so that's a lot of who we're speaking to is people who are just kind of like regular people. And in New York City, our office is in Greenwich Village in Manhattan. We have a coffee shop and an art gallery that we run here. And so largely that's who's coming into our space are just like secular people, artists, creatives, entrepreneurs. We're near New York University, NYU. So there's students that come in. Different groups of people. And so with somebody who is an atheist, I think there's sort of like two things that you do at the same time. One, you just talk the way you normally do, like you're talking about Jesus and praise God for this and he delivered me from that and I'm like his faithful, so just the life of your own testimony. But then there's also sort of another layer of well, what if there was a God? And so you kind of deal with that issue, you know, but so you're talking at two levels at the same time.
Yes.
And I think that kind of thing is important. You know, and if somebody is more agnostic than atheist, okay, so you believe that there's a God out there. Well, what if that God actually cared about what was going on in the world? And so it's just sort of like the baby steps of, well, what if it was like this? Or there are many things people believe that you don't have proofs for. So why do you need proofs for God's existence? And it's just kind of like working to, in some ways, it's dismantling assumptions. But if you're going to engage in a conversation with someone like that, you've got to be willing to have your own assumptions challenged as well. And for me, I said this as part of my testimony, like, why do I still believe is definitely a question that I live with. Why do I still believe? And then also going through periods of doubt myself often builds my faith rather than tears my faith down. And I think that's also because I spend a lot of my time talking with people who don't believe the same thing I do, don't have the same worldview that I do. I mean, there's also in a lot of ways we do share the same worldview. A New York City worldview is a very specific kind of thing. You know, there's cultural values that we have here in New York that I share with my fellow New Yorkers. Walk fast enough or step out of the way. You know, just
an aerobics program.
Right. Just some things like that. You know, our sidewalks are like the road. You wouldn't ever stop in the middle of the road without pulling over first. So why would you do that on the sidewalk? You know, so in some ways I've shared values with New Yorkers, but when it comes to faith and belief, I don't expect that I'm sharing that with the majority of people around me. And so there's an openness to talk about things I'm uncomfortable with. I don't know answers to. I can't speak into everything. And so for me, being comfortable with saying, oh, I don't know. I don't know how I would answer that, or I don't know what I would do in the same scenario that you're in. And then when it comes to spiritual things, it's asking. New York's also a direct culture.
Yeah.
So you can ask direct questions. You can be really straight with people. And
I mean, you Southerners would find that a little brash. My mom's from Jersey, so
okay, yeah,
that is just, it's just like to the point. It's just like, hey, I'm gonna ask this, and you're not gonna get offended because that's just how we roll. Down here, it's bless your heart.
oh yeah.
I can soften this for you, you know. So
I didn't know what bless your heart meant for the longest time. So
it ain't so good.
yeah, well, I know that.
So good. Sometimes they use it in a good way, but most of the time
Yeah, of
it's
course.
trying to be kind.
Yeah.
Oh gosh. Let me ask you this, Liz, you know, before we started, you know, we are living in a very interesting time, and where, you know, we're seeing a lot happen. We're watching Israel.
Yeah.
Because that's really what we have been told to do. We watch Israel because we know that Israel, this is God's chosen people. Beyond a shadow of a doubt, we've been grafted into the vine. We're not the OG, you know, and we're so grateful for that. But there's something very special about God's people, and we're seeing all kinds of things take place on campuses, college campuses, universities. How is that feeling? What's the atmosphere like, especially in a place like New York, for someone?
Yeah. It's a lot. And it's a very heavy thing. Since October 7th, and the massacre that took place, and then the war in Israel and Gaza, and how they've been unfolding, and how political it's been in every way. It's been really, really challenging. It's been very heavy to hold, personally, and then as a minister. And I have family that live in Israel and that are Israeli, and so it affects Israelis differently than Jews around the world. But Jews around the world are also, as they're very deeply affected. Everyone's just kind of carrying different burdens. So in New York, I've been in New York for over 20 years at this point, and with Jews for Jesus, we do outreach on the street. We do public evangelism. Uh, in the early 2000s, we would hear some anti-Semitic comments here and there, but then they kind of disappeared for a while. And that's not to say that anti-Semitism disappeared. It just wasn't being publicly expressed. And my team here go out into Washington Square Park almost every week to do an outreach, engaging with the community. And I'd say a year ago, there were no anti-Semitic comments being made. And that's been the case for a number of years. Since October 7th, and my team going out into the park, they're hearing anti-Semitic comments every single time they go out. Wow. So it was 0, and now it's 100%. And I know these aren't like perfect statistics or anything like that, but just from an experiential and anecdotal standpoint, that's a huge difference.
Like it's amped from 0, it went from 0 to 100, like
yeah.
that.
Yeah.
And that's what we're observing. And of course, Freedom Wranglers stands with Israel. We're praying for Israel because there's a musician that I love, Joshua Aaron, and he is a Messianic. I love his music. And and I saw that his daughter, if you live over there, you're going to serve in the Israeli army, and she of age, and she's serving, and I'm just watching this on social media, and I'm praying for her. I don't know this girl from Adam, but it's like you begin praying for these people because I believe our hearts are spiritually intertwined. If we don't Israel, there's something wrong with us as Christians. We only have salvation because of Jesus Christ, who was Jewish. So people, and so I was curious to see what the atmosphere is like in New York, because I know New York is one of these places that it can be hot very fast.
It gets hot. And we're not talking about the weather, of course. I mean, I'm aware of my surroundings. I think as a woman, I'm also just aware of my surroundings, a woman in the world, but I'm aware of my surroundings in a different way now. I'm just kind of paying attention to things a bit more. I haven't personally had any experiences where I feel unsafe going about my daily life in daily places and things like that. But I know others who have, and I know others who have changed their behavior, their like daily behavior. We'll take the bus instead of the subway. Just like the little things like that. Jewish friends, and it's funny when there's no difference in my conversation when I'm talking with Jewish believers in Jesus or Jewish people who don't believe in Jesus. We talk about, if you wear a Star of David, are you still going to wear it, or are you going to like stop wearing it? Or are you going to make sure it's tucked in? They're like different things like that is just part of normal conversation. Whereas I would never talk to somebody about why or they were or weren't wearing a Star of David necklace or that kind of thing. The NYU had one of the student encampments set up, but the NYU administration dealt with it very differently, that it didn't become the same thing as like Columbia University or UCLA or some of the other places we've heard about in the news. And that gives me some hope because, I don't have hope in school administrations. That's not where I place my hope, but that there's more than one way to respond is encouraging to me, because the amount of anti-Semitism that students are facing on campuses I don't know how these young people have held up under such harassment, pressure, scrutiny. And it's things that they maybe ideologically didn't care about. Yeah. You have no opinion on something, or a very mild opinion on something, and all of a sudden you're being grouped with people you don't know that think things you don't even understand what that means. And so I really feel for Jewish students and high school seniors trying to choose a college for next year, because it's not only your acceptance rate and your programs, but you have to consider how anti-Semitic is the school and how did the administration respond to the last year.
Yeah, you don't.
That's a lot.
Yeah, that is a lot, because you don't even take that into consideration. I'm not thinking in that line of thought. And wow, because I have thought, how are the professors and the teachers that are Jewish feeling where they're having to try and get through these lines, and the students to get to class, and so forth. And there is that potential threat, fear that's going to do something to you because of your heritage. And I mean, I hate saying it, but it begins to bring back echoes of World War II.
Absolutely.
Exactly.
Yeah, Jewish businesses are targeted. There are lists of Jewish businesses that have been made in the last year, and it's terribly upsetting because that's some of what happened in Nazi Germany in the early 30s, not when the war started, before the war started. And so we're only 76 years, 80 years, 76 to 80 years from the Holocaust. And we're already seeing some of these things repeat themselves. But the difference this time is it's happening on a global scale. It's not only happening in one place, it's happening on a global scale. There isn't anywhere in the world that has significant Jewish populations where the Jewish people aren't being targeted.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
When you say they're making lists, who's making who? If that's an okay question, you can say I don't want to answer that. Do we know who's making those lists?
No. I don't know. I know that I'll say as well, like the Palestinian people need a safe home themselves. Hamas needs to be removed from power, from leadership. I don't know the politics. I don't know what a moderate Palestinian leadership looks. I don't know. And I'm not going to pretend to be an expert where I am absolutely not. But in some of the pro-Palestinian movements, there is a deep, anti-Israel hatred. That's clear. Mm-hmm. And with that is a deep Jewish hatred as well. And so it's in those places, it's in like those pockets of the pro-Palestinian movement, which isn't the entire thing. It is also not one thing. There's a lot of nuance, a lot of gray. And I think we need to actually like verbally acknowledge some of this, is that these things aren't all one thing. It's always a spectrum. And so I'm hoping to find people on the more moderate end of the pro-Palestinian movement to be able to engage in conversation. Because if we can start, then maybe we can each go a little bit deeper and deeper back. But if we're not talking at all to people who are quote unquote on the other side, there's going to be there's no empathy that's being built or developed. And I've been thinking about this all the time, but I've been thinking about empathy recently, as that's one of the things that we need now. I've also been thinking about how is the gospel message of Jesus different than the messages of the world, and how, specifically, is the gospel speaking into this situation right now? I know I can't articulate more than that, but that's something I'm trying to think about, trying to figure out.
The Palestinians need Jesus. That's who they need. And I feel like when they come
and the Israelis need Jesus too.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Yes, they both do. And it's like, if they come together, it's like we could actually have a conversation, right?
Yeah. But it goes way back if you read the Old Testament, and it's like, and how many of these people don't understand where so many of these things, I mean, that land has always been fought over.
Always fought over, yeah. It's always changed hands, and the borders have always changed. That's something I found myself saying a little bit more recently. I wasn't saying this 4 months ago, but the borders have always changed.
Yeah.
It's not one thing. And it's hard.
Since 1948, right?
Mm-hmm.
So 75 years they've been a nation.
Yeah.
Which again,
Israel just had its 76th birthday last week.
Okay. Bicentennial.
Okay. Yeah.
Wow. I mean, and there's just so much that I think we look at as outsiders, but also looking at who we respect and we love and say, how do we support them? We can only support like through prayer and through, again, opening dialogues like this, having these questions in those ways. And so do you take trips to Israel, or do you guys organize trips and take them? Do you have any planned, or are things on hold because of everything that's going on?
Yeah. Hey, can you take us with you?
That'd be great. Jews for Jesus actually has a volunteer trip planned for June of 24. And they'll be bringing young adults there, and they'll be volunteering in different places around the country. Some of it related to the kibbutzim, the kibbutzes that were attacked on October 7th. Others just, there are people that are still displaced from those events. And as fighting on the northern border with Lebanon, with Hezbollah in Lebanon, that's also, the people in the north have also been displaced. And so there's a lot of displaced people in Israel right now. So Jews for Jesus has a trip that's going soon. And then personally, I have a trip in September. My nephew will have his bar mitzvah. And so I'm very excited for that family.
How old do you have to be for a bar mitzvah?
So for boys, it's 13, and for girls, it's at 12.
Okay.
And it is a coming of age ceremony that in the Jewish community and Jewish tradition, that from that point, you're considered an adult in the community. And so what that means is that you count, you count as an adult and no longer as a child. And so that's sort of the first place where that distinction starts to be made. Of course, we know they're in today's society, there are very few 12 or 13-year-olds that could possibly function as adults. So it's the beginning of that maturing process, but you count as like, you count differently from that point. So
see, I would have loved to have done that for Uriah, my 15-year-old. I would have loved to do something like that for him. I wouldn't know where to have begun.
Yeah. Well, I think any sort of coming of age ceremonies, I mean, in the US, without religion, without it like outside of religion, that's what a high school graduation is. That is a coming of age ceremony. And so you could add other things to it that would make it more like, it's not just that you're finishing high school and that we're celebrating that, but now you're going to be thinking for yourself. You're going to be making decisions for yourself, and you're really going to start to shape what kind of person you want to be. And, so you can make, I think I used to work with kids and with teens with Jews for Jesus when I first started, after out of the summer camps and all of that sort of thing. So I think coming of age ceremonies for teenagers is actually a really good thing for people to, the teenagers don't like them. But most of the time they appreciate it later.
A lot of preparation for your bar mitzvah. Like Adam Sandler actually did a movie this past.
You're so not invited.
Are the parties that big?
They can be. Yeah, they can be like wedding ceremonies. But they can also be super simple. There's a family I knew that they actually went to a hotel in their area and basically just had a pool party at the hotel. So they booked a room overnight and then just used the pool. So it was really simple, but that's so much fun to get to do with like a small group of friends. So it doesn't have to be this all out thing. Although I have been to some that are all out and you're just like, whoa.
Much money.
I had never seen so many balloons in my life. But it was fun.
So when you guys worship, like Jews for Jesus, do you like really get into it? Like you kick your feet and do you do all the dancey stuff?
So actually, that's a good question. So Jews for Jesus is an organization and not representative of Messianic Judaism or Messianic Jewish people as a whole. So our staff worship in like in many different denominations of
Okay.
churches. So some are, charismatic or Pentecostal, and some are more traditional Methodist, Presbyterian, etc., and everything in between, and including Messianic congregations as well, depending on what city you live in, and then it's the same as like people going to different churches. If you're not attached to a denomination, why do you go to that church? There's any number of things that people are looking for from the worship experience, including I've got kids and I just need a great kids program and I'll be fine with what is here for adults, or, however that goes.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. So
Yeah.
the separation there, Jews for Jesus is the organization, and then
Yeah.
the Messianic congregations or the people that work for the organization go to various different types of Christian churches.
Yeah.
So it doesn't matter. Like anybody could, they come from all different backgrounds and denominations. And hey, if you want to dance for Jesus, do it.
Yep.
Do it.
Exactly.
It's the kind I visited when we went to the Messianic church.
Yeah.
That was the kind. They did a lot of dancing. There were a lot of tambourines.
Yeah.
This is so cool. Why are we not doing this in our church? So
that's me. I'm the dancer in the church. The tambourine.
It's fun.
Man, we could go on and on for hours, Liz, because there's just so many different things, that we could talk about, because the roots are deep and history is so strong. Before I pass you over to Jamie, if there was just one message that you would like to get out to everybody from someone who is Jewish in roots, but serves Jesus, the Messiah, that's really what it comes down to. You guys say, hey, yes, he is the Messiah. What would you say to our listeners is like a key thing that we need to understand? How can we continue to pray for Israel?
Yeah, I have that. I have that thing. So we were talking about anti-Semitism and rising anti-Semitism, as part of this conversation. And I didn't yet say, this is a really good time for Christians, wherever they may be, to reach out to the Jewish people that might be in their communities. Whether it's a neighbor, a coworker, an extended family member, an acquaintance, a really weak social tie, go ahead and reach out and say, how are you doing? How's this year been? I've been praying for the Jewish people. And I just want you to know that I see you, and I can see that this is a difficult time. And it's not just to support a person in the midst of a difficult time, though that is important. But I think it's also really important for Christians to stand with the Jewish people as a people, because there are many Jewish people around the world that are going, are we in like 1920s Germany right now? And so there is a real fear, and there's a wondering of, will anyone stand with us? Or is it just us against the world again? And so I think for that reason, that's a really good time. There's an opportunity to just kind of say, what are you holding? Like, what's changed for you this year? What hasn't changed for you this year in light of what's happened since October 7th? So I think that would be a real, a call to action, that's something that's really needed at this time.
It tugs on my heartstrings in a couple of different ways. And the first way is, my sister, she actually texted me yesterday and she said, I had lunch with my friend Lydia. And then she named the gentleman, and she said, and he's Jewish. And it was just so wonderful to sit. He talked about how they didn't traditionally practice Shabbat, but now they've really introduced it over the past couple of years, and their family, and getting back to who he really is. And then, a picture of his son at his bar mitzvah and all these things. And she said, I just wanted to hug him, because I wanted to let him know that, hey, I love you and your people. I'm here with you. And so that answers a great question for myself,
express that, actually like vocalize that.
I am going to encourage that 100%,
Yeah.
In her. And the other side is just thinking about what took place during
Mhm.
and that there are people that I still cannot wrap my mind around it that say it didn't happen. And it did. What was it, 4 million Jews? Is that right? Am I right in that? 6 million Jews murdered, slaughtered.
Yeah.
It's not okay. And I, for one, I'd certainly know, and I know I can speak for you, Jamie, we would not stand by.
Yeah.
At all. I would hope to be likened to someone like Corey Ten Boom or whatever, that would say, no, I'm here with you. We won't even let this happen. We would go that far. But yeah, I think that's very powerful. And that gives us an opportunity and the freedom to just step in and say, hey, we're here.
Right.
Yeah. Jamie, I don't want to steal the last question here. If you got something, girl.
Well, I guess I just have a thought, about just what is happening right now, in our country and what's happening in Israel. And it's almost as if it is very exciting times we're living in, because I do believe the Lord is coming. I believe he's coming back for his people, and that our eyes are on Israel right now. We're seeing everything, and that my thoughts are that we have to continue being supportive and pray for Israel. And knowing that the Lord, he looks at Israel as the apple of his eye. And so we should also, with the Spirit of the Lord in us, acknowledge that and be encouraging during this time. And that if the Holy Spirit prompts you to speak to somebody about salvation, the boldness needs to come out right now, because I believe the times of the Gentiles is coming to a close. So the times are closing in on us. So this is the time right now to be super bold. It's time to be super bold. It's time to be super charismatic and just loving on people and sharing Christ. And so this is that time. And so we need to encourage our Jewish friends that we love them and that we're praying for them, but also pray for salvation for them as well, because the times are closing in. And, if we read Revelations, we know that we don't want them to have to go through tribulation, although there's going to be some that do. But we just need to pray and give them the gospel, because they need it desperately. And we should be ever so bold. And those are my thoughts today, and I'm just so thankful for you coming on, Liz. I mean, thank you so much for spending time with us. I hope we're encouraging to you.
Yeah. Thank you. I've appreciated being here. Thanks for inviting me as a guest.
It's God's timing for sure, because we were just like, wow, this is, with everything taking place in the world, to have the opportunity to highlight the Jewish people, the Jewish culture, and to highlight those that are witnessing with, as you said, indigenous within your own culture, telling them about Jesus. It's just, we're so honored to be able to have this platform to, invite you on and things. So God is good. We're just excited, and we're praying for many blessings upon you and on your travels this coming September. So is that a big family trip then? You're going to do Israel because of his bar mitzvah? Is that the big thing?
Yeah. Yes. We're excited for that.
Wonderful. Well, we hope you have a great time, and we'll just be praying for you and covering you and, anybody else we encounter. So thanks so much, Liz.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you guys.